As you well know, our synagogue, we had a nice group of members from Beth Torah and those connected to Beth Torah who joined in the Friends of the March of Living trip. You have the March of the Living, which is the teenagers, thousands from all over the world, and then created in Miami something called Friends of the March of the Living by the late Leo Martin, who was a survivor, powerful man who was very involved in March of the Living, its creation, and then decided to create a adult March of the Living, because most adults, they didn't go on the teenage March of the Living. It didn't exist even then. So he encouraged adults to go on a parallel trip, and we would meet the kids in certain places and participate with them, and other things we do on our own. And the purpose of the trip is not only to bring adults to Poland and to the death camps and to learn the history and experience by being there, a better feeling for what happened, but also raises a lot of money to do scholarships for the kids, because it's an expensive trip. Most of the kids need some type of scholarship help, and that's what the Friends of the March of Living does. So this year, every year they invite a different rabbi in the community to try and attract people from their congregations. This year I had the privilege of going. 1/3 of the bus was Beth Torah and people connected to Beth Torah, and it was a very powerful experience. We had some speakers last night, and today, because the ones who we're most familiar with, the Brombergs, because they're regulars at our minyan, our resident Kohanim, and they're here each week, so I thought it'd be appropriate for them to share their experience, their feelings about it, that with this group, which knows them so well. So I want to invite the Brombergs up to talk about the experience they had. They, by the way, continued on, as I did, to Budapest, but they went even farther. They went over to Prague afterwards, so they had a really overview. But Poland is the focus of the March of the Living, and Budapest was an add-on, fascinating, and then you added on Prague. And what? And Vienna, okay.
We just came back last night. Wow. I mean, yesterday at 6.
Okay. Very good.
Oh my God.
Okay.
How you do this?
You stand in front of the microphone. Yeah. And you ignore them. You just
yeah, that's the key?
Just talk to the camera.
Okay. Anyway, well, first of all, we want to thank Rabbi Ed Farber and mailman Mark Baratnik to put together this important and meaningful trip. Every person has their own reason of why they want to do this trip. However, we believe that every person should have this experience no matter what religion. In our case, we need to honor our parents. We are second-generation Holocaust survivors and the survivors. During the trip, we had very special moments in which we can recall, and a lot of stories. But we will focus only in 2 of those. Although almost at the end of the march of the closing ceremony of Yom HaShoah at Birkenau, due to the incredible lightning and rain, we were forced to run back to the bus. Without knowing the area, we lost contact with all the members of our group. We took cover on a portable bathroom. We thought we can get cover until the rain stops. However, it was flooded. We decided to keep running, looking for the bus. At last, we found the bus and the group, which brought us to a very powerful feeling of being able to realize that we are out and alive from the same place where our ancestors, by the millions, didn't make it. Yes. For us, that heavy rain symbolized that even Hashem was crying from heaven as well.
Another experience was in Treblinka, which was situated in a beautiful forest area, completely isolated from the nearest town. Treblinka was in fact an industrial scale of an extermination camp, in which almost 900,000 fellow Jews were killed, and the Nazis were able to dismantle and destroy before they ran away. Elie Wiesel said that the opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. The majority of the humanity was indifferent to our suffering.
There are so beautiful things that the rabbi mentioned among the trip, and one of the things that impressed me the most, it was, so true. Everybody said, how come God allows to have this kind of, thing that happen? But he mentioned that how human beings, that's the question that we have. Remember that moment? Mm-hmm. I think it was in Maldanik.
Yes, it was
that,
in Maldanik.
That he said, how come we allow humans to do this kind of thing, not God? It's not his responsibility.
It was Majdanek, because remember,
ours.
Majdanek, which is the most well-preserved camp, literally within 12 hours it could be functioning again. It wasn't destroyed, it was abandoned completely without anything being destroyed, and it wasn't bombed. So it's powerful to see that. But remember, we were looking up, and there were apartment houses and houses, and we could almost look through the windows, and people asked, wait a second, were they there? And they were.
Yeah.
Meaning they heard, they smelled, and they saw, and went about their business.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's when we talked about it. As I said, it's how did they let this happen?
That's why Elie Wiesel also mentioned how, people can ignore, we can ignore when we see something that it's true.
Yeah, that was the power of Majdanek. Treblinka was hidden, nobody knew it. Remember the ride to Treblinka, like, where are we? Yeah. We were literally in the middle of a forest, and we understood there was nobody nearby. The truth is they didn't see, they didn't hear. The people doing it knew, but the people around them did, but not Majdanek. Right there in the midst of it. Magnificent city, Lublin. So that's why we had that discussion.
And Majdanek, I was talking yesterday also when we came back with my daughter, our daughter that went there. I said the ovens were exactly the size built for humans, not just a regular oven.
Right.
And for babies, the size. One thing is to see a movie, but to be there and experience is unbelievable.
Right, and by the way, in most of the movies, they use Majdanek because it's there, particularly the ovens. Thank you. I know it's not easy to talk about it. So let me add one, what's the message? By the way, we should mention something else. I said Leo Martin, the great Leo Martin, who was a survivor, and his story was astonishing. He survived because he was 6'6" and strong, and they needed him, and they put him to work. The worst kind of work possible, but he was physically able. There weren't a lot of 6'6" Polish Jews, okay? He was huge, right? A strong, powerful man, both in body and in spirit. And he said, that's what kept me alive. They needed me, and I was able to stay alive because of that. But also, the one who began the trip, he conceived of it, but the one who directed it in its first years was our own Marshall Baltic. Right, who we miss so much. Marshall was the director and the one who did what did he do? He did fundraising. You know what Marshall did? He raised funds. But he also went on the trip and directed it with his tremendous skills. So Marshall was the one who led the March of the Living and then handed it over. Mel Mann took over, and he's a child of survivors. So it's very fortuitous that we talked about this during this Torah reading. Because we had the Torah reading combined, right? Acharei mot. So what's acharei mot? It means after the death of. Right? In that case, they were talking about Aaron's children, but that's in that title. What a weird Torah portion. You start a Torah portion with the words after the death? The rabbis did that on purpose. All right, so they said, what are you doing? What's the idea? And what's the second portion? Kiddushim. What are Kiddushim? People who die, al Kiddush Hashem, people who die to sanctify God's name, people who die simply because they're Jewish, or because they're preserving the Torah, or because they're preserving the state of Israel, because they're preserving and protecting the Jewish people, are called Kiddushim, holy ones. So now we have a combination. Again, the rabbis did this purposely. After the death of Kiddushim, we're hanging, right? After the death of Kiddushim, what? What's the message? What's next? And what's next week's portion? And more. What is and more? Speak. Speak out. So the rabbi's message, because remember, the rabbis came after a period of time of the destruction of the first temple, the destruction of the second temple, the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Millions of Jews were killed in those rebellions. The temple was destroyed. We lost sovereignty in the land of Israel. We experienced exile. We have the story on Yom Kippur of the rabbis, right, who were put to death for trying to preserve Torah and for rebelling against Rome. So they were Kiddushim. So when the rabbis set this up, they didn't have a Holocaust, but they had their own Holocaust in which millions of Jews were killed in the rebellion against Rome. We lost our temple, we lost Jerusalem, we lost Eretz Yisrael, right? So they purposely set this up. After the death of holy ones, you need to speak out. And that's what the March of the Living is. It's speaking out. It's covered, by the way, amazingly how it's covered in Poland. Poland totally supports the March of the Living in every possible way. And in every camp we went, we saw that they were working on preserving it. It's a constant effort. You have to preserve it because most of it was built out of wood, so you have to preserve the wood. Then you had the shoes, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of shoes of the victims. And someone took it upon themselves to put together a group and to preserve those shoes by painting them with certain chemicals that would bring them back to life and prevent them from deteriorating. And work is done constantly on the roads to the camps to make sure they're easily accessible. Every student in Poland is required as part of the curriculum to go to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And there's a whole curriculum and a whole plan for when they come for their tour of Auschwitz-Birkenau. And they also, they wear something and put out something during that week to announce Yom HaShoah to everyone. So it's something that the Polish government and Polish people are extremely supportive of, which we appreciated greatly. And in fact, we have a Polish guide when we're on the trip, and also a Polish guide, non-Jewish, in Auschwitz, who was extremely well educated and very, very empathetic. So that desire by Poland to preserve the camps has been a blessing to the Jewish people and something very important to humanity. So the message is very clear. You have to speak out. And one of the major disappointments after October 7th was how many didn't speak out. Even to this day, how many didn't raise their voices in protest, in empathy, in demanding the release of the hostages. We listen to politicians around the world, and of course, everyone wants peace. They want a cessation of fire. They want some type of deal that will bring the killing to an end. We understand that. But how do they begin their sentence without first calling for the release of the hostages? In other words, they start on October 8th and they ignore October 7th. Empathy and sympathy for the death of innocent civilians in Gaza makes sense. Obviously, nobody wants to see the death of innocents. But how do you not start off with what the innocents that were killed on October 7th? How do you not explain that the only reason innocent people die in Gaza is because Hamas is putting out there to die? That's their goal. The more innocents that are killed, the better off Hamas is. They understand that because they understand how the West thinks. So the lack of speaking out after October 7th was perhaps our most profound disappointment. And then the demonstrations on the university campuses, which ignored October 7th and even put the blame on Israel for October 7th. And you didn't have the universities speaking out strongly and acting strongly against it, so they didn't learn a lesson. After the death of innocents, not just Jews, any innocent people, you have to speak out against the evil that perpetrated those horrors. So that was one of our great disappointments. And as a people, we have to remember that the reason we teach about the Holocaust is so that we speak out to make sure that it doesn't happen again to us or to any other people. So it's not forgotten. If you don't speak out, then people will forget. They won't remember. And that's why there's been a plethora of museums that have been created. Right? You know, there wasn't a single Holocaust museum in America except for one little museum in a JCC in Los Angeles that was created by a family in the LA JCC. It wasn't a real organized effort. Right? Survivors did it, exactly. They're the ones who created it. They had all this memorabilia in their house, and they said that they flooded them. Right. Right, and then that was the first one. So you go from 1945 to 1978, you don't have a Holocaust museum? Right. Right, that was the first one. Exactly. Now, the TV show, I don't know if you remember it, but it was a series. And today, everything is a series, right? But that was risky in those days. The first series ever done flopped. We should go back and look at it because it was great, but people didn't understand series. It was about Martin Luther King. It flopped. 5 parts, and it didn't fly. And then 2 Jews, luckily one in charge of CBS programming, says, it's time. We got to do something. And they took this huge risk and put out this series called The Holocaust, and it caught fire. Not only here, in Europe. In Europe, they put it on at 11 o'clock at night because they didn't want people to watch it. They watched it. And after that, all of a sudden, Holocaust museums everywhere. Why? Because they understood we forgot to speak out. We were quiet for decades. And Elie Wiesel, the first one to speak out in literature, right? Writing the book Night, in the first year or two, I don't think he sold 3,000 copies until finally, somehow, it caught fire. It's like that tipping point type of thing. And now, Holocaust museums. Why? Because we understood what is a museum, what is the great sculpture on Miami Beach, right, which is the best sculpture in the world commemorating the Holocaust, and the magnificent United States Holocaust Museum and museums all over the world. Why? Because we finally realized after the death of holy ones, you don't sit quietly, you speak out. So we went on March of the Living, and then we came back, and everyone, the kids will be speaking. We'll have some of the kids speaking on Yom Kippur. They're going to come back for Yom Kippur. They're going to speak. We had some speaking last night. They'll have people speaking to other groups, because that's why we do it. We go on the March of the Living so that we can follow the rabbi's instructions of thousands of years ago. After the death of innocents, you have to speak out. You have to point to the evil, and you have to support those who have suffered from that evil. And then after you speak out, you have to take action to prevent it from happening again. So thank you to the Brombergs for sharing their thoughts with us. They were so involved in this thing. They were questions and learning. And I'm glad that you afterwards got to relax a little bit, because Budapest is a whole different experience, as I know Prague is as well, because you see Jewish life regrouping, and there are 100,000 Jews in Budapest, an alive Jewish community, right? And the memorials along the Danube River, shoes, right? Because that's where the Iron Cross, the Hungarians who supported the Nazis, that's where, because they couldn't get the Jews out of Budapest, because there was no cooperation. There were righteous Gentiles there who were helping Jews in Budapest, not outside of Budapest, but in Budapest. And so they simply tied them together and pushed them into the river. Right? Yeah. Bullets, right. They'd shoot one, and then that would drag all the others in and drown them. Right. And so there's a memorial there, right there. And lots of righteous Gentiles. Raoul Wallenberg, a priest that many people didn't hear of, who saved hundreds and hundreds of Jewish children. It's uplifting when you see things about righteous Gentiles. There weren't enough of them, but we should never forget there were, because the more you talk about righteous Gentiles, the more people say, I want to be like them, not like the perpetrators. I want to be like the righteous Gentiles. I want to be the one who saves people and not ignores it or corroborates with it. So